Hi everyone, welcome to the Lacanian chalkboard. Today we're going to talk again about theoretical models. I'm going to go over the ego and the id, and then I'll read you a bit of Norbert Elias. He's a German sociologist, and the book I'm reading is called The Society of Individuals. So let's get to it because the topic of models, it's quite important for us here in this channel. I do believe that depending on the theory, you will have a certain clinic. So what guides your clinic? It's a good question. So let's see what Freud is saying when he introduces this new model. Well, he's basically saying, look, first, too much focus on repression. Repression. He says also that the ego can also be unconscious, which gets him in a very complicated situation with the conscious unconscious distinction. And then Lacan's going to do something very specific about that with his topology. He says the consciousness is located at the surface of the psychic apparatus, closest to the external world. All external perceptions and internal sensations or feelings are conscious immediately. He also says that thought processes, they do raise difficulties. How do they become conscious? He talks about internal processes that must transform into external perceptions only via memory traces. We see that Freud has this idea of memory that is quite, it's closer to some kind of a neurobiological idea, whereas in Lacan, with the Purloin letter, we learned that memory for Lacan is something else, if there is such a thing with that word memory, but it's definitely not the memory we used to think intuitively, as Freud is talking about here. He talks about pleasure and unpleasure. So unpleasure increased energy and presses for release, and pleasure decreased generates no pressure, no pressure. And he says clinical evidence shows unpleasure becomes conscious only when resistance interrupts discharge. He takes Grodek's view that we are largely lived by unknown forces, so he adopts id after Grodek to name the unconscious realm of impulses. Now think about this. I don't really like the idea of impulses, of instinct, of something that is inside a human being that is terribly good or bad. And then the ego begins at the perception system, then become preconscious. The ego begins at the perception system. And it says ego as a modified id. Ego is the part of the id transformed by external reality via perception. Functions as a mediator, imposes the reality principle against the id's pleasure principle. So basically, and then Freud says that ego embodies reason and deliberation, id houses passions. It's a choice you have to make. If you think Freud was a revolutionary writer, was an honest thinker, scientific man, but from that he was all the way right, and that his model, his way of seeing things, is still the best one we have, even after what Lacan did with psychoanalysis. Then it's a choice. It's not a certainty. It's a choice. We have to choose which theoretical model we're using to analyze things. So most importantly, what Freud has here is a psychic egg and then an individual. This is the individual psychic egg and has a nucleus and it's separated. So for my politically engaged friends, according to Freud, the way to think politics would be to think of a clash of eggs, of psychic eggs, right? One egg here versus another egg. You scale this, and you go, oh, big adjustment here. Yeah, so egg versus egg. Um, is that still the best we can do? Even after all the politics confusion that has been going on, people voting for people that we don't understand why they are voting. Maybe it's because it's not as much as a clash. Maybe it's because ça parle. Maybe it's because we should use, not because, but maybe we don't understand it because we're trying to use this model. Maybe another model would make make a better explanation. Now, let's see what Norbert Elias has to say about this clash of psychic eggs. He calls it billiard balls. So basically, what Norbert Elias is saying is that we think things are from within us, but in reality, what happens to a child in the 12th century and how it developed its own instincts is quite different from a child and the instincts of this child in the 20th century. Now, I'm not going to go into the fact of instincts or not instincts because this is not the case here. But what's interesting is that at some point he's gonna say, why do we have trouble understanding certain things? And he says, advances of individualization, as in the Renaissance, for example, are not the consequence of a sudden mutation within individual people or of the chance conception of especially high number of gifted people. So, for example, Pinker's theory of language, or the majority of all the reasoning nowadays, implies that same kind of thinking for everything, for language, for how we came to build houses, from how we came to organize ourselves like this. We usually think of things like this: the mutation within individual people, or of the chance conception of especially high number of gifted people that change something. He's saying, no, these are social events, consequences of breaking up old groupings or change in the social position of the artist craftsman, for example, in the case of Renaissance. In short, the consequences of a specific restructuring of human relationships. So not by the individual. And here I think I don't believe he mentions it, but there's a hint of Sapa where it speaks, it thinks. Ah, aho, where there's an ego for Lacan, it's not a nucleus. The ego is the other. So from this side too, Norbert says, from this side, too, it's easy to lose sight of the fundamental importance of the relations between people for the individual in their midst. And these difficulties too result, at least in part, from the type of thought models that are used in thinking about these relationships. So he's talking precisely about this. What is the theoretical model you're using to try to understand something? As so often, these models are derived from the simplest relationships between three-dimensional bodies. I've been talking a lot here about the distinction Lacan does between three-dimensional bodies, which is what Freud has in his background, versus 2D surfaces with Lacan, and topology, and language, and discourse, and surfaces, topological surfaces. So again, these models are derived from the simplest relationships between three-dimensional bodies. He's saying this is a mistake. We shouldn't be analyzing things that way. The effort of reorientation needed to break free of these models is certainly no less than that which was necessary when physicists began thinking in terms of the relationships between bodies, rather than starting from the individual bodies, such as the sun or the moon. This is spectacular. The relation between people is often imagined like that between billiard balls, egg against egg. They're clashing. They collide and roll apart. But the interaction between people, the network phenomena they produce, are essentially different from the purely additive interactions of physical substances. This is a marvelous chapter. This is a marvelous book. You have to read it. But bottom line, what we're doing here today is there are different models to understand things. Clash between people sometimes is not the best. Clash between psychic models sometimes is not the best. And to be honest, I believe for a clinic in 2025, in mixing of otherness seems quite suitable, right? Where once there was a hole, there's nothing, and you can now have an articulation with the other all the time. Who is saying something is a question always present in Lacanian clinic. Who is saying? Remember, desire in one, demand on the other, demand on one, desire on in the other. And Lacan says exactly like this. There's always a question of who said it. And to think of this model, I don't believe suffices. We need a different model. And Lacan provides one, not perfect, not finished, none of that, but a different model. So we're going to go back to this at some point, I'm sure. But for today, that's it. So read that book by Norbert Elias. And that's it. Thank you very much.